We're here talking with Julian Stacey, a recording and mixing engineer, a musician, a producer, and an all-around wonderful guy. Julian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I guess first order of business, if you want to just introduce yourself and talk about what you do and how you got into it. What's your story, Julian?
So I am a mixing engineer and audio engineer and producer at Gravity Studios in Chicago. It's a studio that's been around since the early 90s. They kind of, it rose to more prominence in the Chicago scene with like indie alternative bands, grunge stuff. Veruca Salt was, they would hang around there and record stuff, and then a lot of like Chicago rock bands and emo bands kind of started recording there.
Sure.
Fall Out Boy, Hawthorne Heights, and it's kind of a nice stop for artists who are, when CRC is Chicago Recording Company, kind of like the big oldest studio in the city. When it's kind of booked up, or premier artists who are touring through the town want something a little smaller and intimate, or if CRC is totally booked up, they'll come over to Gravity, and we've got great gear and great staff to kind of help them get their stuff going. So I got into it because I was in a band in high school that recorded at Gravity, and I got to know Doug McBride, who owns the studio.
Mm-hmm.
He's a really cool guy. We had a lot in common, and we kind of just hit it off. And I fast forward like maybe eight to 10 years later, I was living in LA at the time, and I was kind of in between gigs or in between apartments, and I was working in commercial music, and he was like, "Hey, we got an extra, we got more space here for another producer engineer to come. If you ever want to move back to Chicago, there's work here for you." So I was like, kind of thinking, I miss my family, and my brother was, he's married, and I kind of wanted a more like relaxed lifestyle. I think LA was a little crazy for me.
Sure.
So I moved back, and I've been working there since 2017.
I want to talk to you about Gravity because it's a really cool place. I've had the fortune to be there one time and check it out.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I want to talk about, do you guys have any like really cool special vintage gear there that is kind of your pride there?
Well, certainly the console, the 5315 Neve discrete console. It's
amazing. Tell us about that.
Well, we didn't. It's kind of a smaller version of what Doug had for most of the life of Gravity, but with workflows speeding up and clients needing edits, quickly, and whatever, it's hard to kind of. It's not automated, so you have to like really know the board to kind of pull up mixes. So, we shrank down, and it's really just like, it's just got a nice depth to it that I had never really, I started in the box, right? And I was doing commercial music, and everything I ever did was in the box, and I made that work for me. But once I kind of just like, Doug really like kind of held my hand and was like, "You should look at these things because they're really nice." And so this console was like a world, like, it opened my eyes to like just great sounding pre's. And, I've been aware of them, and people talk about, the great stuff. We also have some really nice V72s at Gravity that I'm kind of like now leaning towards. But they just, I don't know. It's just, I don't know much about it. It's just like in the early 70s, I think. And it just has like, you don't have to do anything. That's the nicest thing. You just put up the microphone, and, you kind of just like, for drums, it's really nice. You just lay it across the board, and and the summing paths. I mean, yeah, come on, old stuff. Everyone knows about this, right? It's like, can't beat it. Neves are great, you know?
Yeah, some of that older gear, especially audio gear, just because like the technology that it's based on is so fundamental and so simple. Like a lot of older stuff is really built to last and really, really built to like, you know, be rugged and be durable. Whereas some of the stuff that comes up now that's like more digitally focused, you know, it's just like less reliable. You have to replace it. It's not kind of meant to be as rugged as some of that other stuff.
Totally.
That is older is. So I definitely feel that vintage gear.
There are aspects like where you have to like clean the pots just by like wiggling them and like, you know, nice. like pressing the button a million times and it'll like kind of clear the gunk out. And so that's kind of annoying. But once you kind of like, I think the hardest thing is like getting clients when people are moving files around all the time and the digital world lets you like do a whole different version of your song in like, you know, the same session, you know, with just a couple little quick moves.
Right.
I think the key for me has been like using the analog gear for like what it's like the meat and potatoes of it. Like I'm not always gonna like mix on the console, but I'll send everything through it just to sum it. You know what I mean? And try to not touch it as much as possible, but just kind of like get it in the transformers and just kind of get it in there. So I do a lot. I still do most editing and like, you know, specific fine tuning in the DAW, but you know, if you're running through the board, if you're tracking on the board, it makes a big difference. So.
Right. So you kind of like to do a hybrid thing. Like you like to use your big meaty analog console, like just to like, you know, have everything mic'd up, pass signal through it and like, and that stuff. And then you use the digital stuff where it's useful, you know, and making all those little changes and doing the other stuff you can.
Yeah. And obviously type of music matters, you know.
Oh, sure. I mean, talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do a lot of pop music, which is like hardly touch the analog gear at all. I mean, it's only vocals really that are doing that, or a guitar part, you know, an acoustic guitar part, or, you know, not a lot of actual like gear being used when the pop artists come in, or even, you know, rap. But, you know, if I'm recording a band, that they're much more sensitive to that, and hitting that stuff, just, it gives it a more like, it sounds like the records you grew up listening to.
Right.
Which strangely like has a smaller dynamic range ultimately, like in terms of, or it has a higher dynamic range, but a lower like fidelity in terms of like, you know, pop music is like from the first chorus out, it's like full range, full bass, full high end. But, you know, a Steely Dan record, you know, doesn't quite sound full range the whole way, and it's more dynamic and whatever. So I don't know. It's like, you really have to have great musicians to utilize the analog gear to its fullest potential, you know, because it's just, if they don't know if they don't have good sound on their end, if your source is not that great, it's like, what is it exactly the point of like, why do you want to capture this like beautiful, like with this great stuff, some, you know, garbage? So I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, I'd like to hear your opinion on it. I feel like a lot of people, a lot of audio people, a lot of casual music people like to talk about the state of music today, especially the state of production of music today. Like you'll see some people who are like, it's the most creative, innovative it's ever been. And some people will be like, the most creative and innovative it's ever been. And some people will be like, everything is the same 808 sound and the snares all sound the same and it's all trap beats with like, you know, easy chord progressions over them. So like, what are your thoughts on this? Do you fall in one camp or the other? Are you somewhere in between? Tell me what you think as a producer who's working today.
I think every genre of music is defined by new technological innovations. And so, what we're hearing a lot is computer, like the power of the computer. And that's like its own, almost, people are like, oh, I'm sort of like soul funk, indie rock, like bluesy, whatever. And there are these amalgamations of genres. And that's kind of like the information age. It's the computer. It's like all these, it's a collage of sounds from the past all coming together for whatever purpose. I find that to be extremely creative and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The question though is like, you know, are we losing sight of what makes people like music? And I often think, yes, the answer is yes. I mean, I hear so many new artists who have incredible voices and cool tracks, but like, I like tell them to play the song on an acoustic guitar and sing it, and I'm like kind of losing interest. You know, like there is there's a type of sound that I don't think we'll ever really achieve again. And that's like, you know, kind of the big, like basically from the Beatles to the Bee Gees, you know, like these kind of like just really well produced, all analog, all real instruments, all real ideas, all well thought out, you know, parts. And I'm always like, in my mind, I'm always like, oh, am I just nostalgic? You know what I mean? Am I just in love with the past? And like, and I'm like afraid of the future and the, you know, like who are the Beatles of today?
Right.
You know, maybe during the Beatles time, what I thought they were the Beatles, you know, like as amazing as they were, I don't know. But I don't think, I think it is really hard to put that stuff together. Because it requires so many resources and like people like hanging out in the studio around the clock, which is just so expensive now, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's great.
What do
I
you
love
think
that.
about that?
What do I think? I think that there definitely can be like a homogeneity in like the literal kinds of sounds, like the kinds of samples that are used. But I also like today, obviously, I mean, but I also think that like production in itself is extremely creative, and who's to say that like a really unique beat with sounds and samples that you would have never thought of is not as artistically valid as a great chord progression or as like a great voice, you know, like what is actually the difference artistically?
Yeah.
It sounds to me like you're talking about like, for you, there needs to be a marriage too of like artistry and craft in there. Like the song has to be, you know, it has to be a well-written song, or it has to be like a really soulful performance of it, you know, that like just the gear and the tech and the production alone, like is not what really the gig is all about. Like music is about being more holistic than that.
Yeah. And I think there's an interesting trend also in music. And when I talk, I'm coming from like a very mainstream thought process, right?
Totally.
Like I do get into funky experimental stuff, but that is like its own niche pursuit that, you know, that is very valid and great and has a lot of cool stuff going on. But when we talk about like mainstream kind of music, maybe music that a lot of people are listening to, or a lot of people are like excited about going to the shows, I also find there's like, you know, hookiness is it's so important to so many artists. Mm-hmm. And I've found that I'm still a true believer in a great hook, because like, you know, that you can take with you when the song isn't playing. It's still in your head. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But now with like the kind of ubiquity of places like to listen to music, and we're kind of always listening to music, I think more people are interested in like music that just makes you feel a certain way when you're listening to it, mm-hmm. versus like the idea that you can take with you on the road and kind of like, you know, these singles historically were like, let's make the melody as simple as possible so that it fits within the chord structures. It lands on the root, the third or the fifth, so that people can easily remember, you know, the melody, and then they consider it to their friend. You can wake up in the morning, it's the first thing you can remember, versus songs that are more complex in terms of their songwriting, where you kind of have to go to the channel, or the, you know, YouTube or Spotify or whatever, to listen to it. And then it makes you feel really cool because it's got like really beautiful soundscapes, and they experiment with like just sound design and composition. And that's more like experiential to me than like than a typical pop song, which is just trying to like earworm its way into your brain, mm-hmm. so that, you know, you can, you know, whatever, singing it in the shower. So I like that kind of, I like the earworm stuff. I like the, you know, music that you can sing from beginning to end and know every single note and every lyric as well. Just because I think it connects us, you know, like if you know it and I know it, like if I'm singing it, my girlfriend hears me singing it and she's in the other room and then she starts singing it and then we're like experiencing this song without even listening to it together. You know, I think that's like a cool thing versus like me being like, you should check out this artist and listen on your headphones and then I'll listen to him and then we'll go to the show, but we can't really like sit here and sing the song together. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Yeah. That's great. That's awesome. Thanks for that. And as someone who produces music, you know, our audience is a lot of audiophiles, a lot of serious gearheads, and that, you know, of course, there's a lot of preferences within a group like that. So I want to get your perspective on, you know, vinyl versus CD versus, you know, super high resolution lossless files. Are you a snob? Are you a self-proclaimed snob in one of these areas, or do you think it's all overblown? What do you think?
I think it's a little overblown.
Interesting. Yeah.
I've definitely attempted to get into being like a vinyl person, and I have like my vinyl set up right there. I've got some nice preamps and a nice turntable, but I've tried sampling records and using them in like beats, and then I've tried to like I'll just like listen to the records I have, and I mean, they physically wear down. So that by definition is not like high quality audio. So they wear out over time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you have like a perfect scenario, like a perfectly pressed record and perfectly preserved with like the best like diamond needle and like great pre's and like, you know, all these like, you know, super low like noise, whatever, chords and shit and like passive speakers, like if you have all the perfect stuff, it's still probably going to sound like pretty like good. It's going to sound great, but you can still get that sound like on our barefoots in the studio with some like really nice like previously recorded stuff, sample stuff, electronic stuff. So I mean, it's so hard for me to tell the difference, like high end stuff. Like the only reason I need to hear the really high stuff is when I'm like getting something really loud, like mastering, and then you just need to hear the distortion.
Right.
You know, otherwise, I mean, it's like, I'm not that much of an audiophile. I've dabbled with it and I honestly, maybe I can't hear those frequencies. I've tested my hearing many times and I can hear really high frequencies. I guess I just don't care about them that much, you know? Which brings me to like, actually, you remember the Laurel Yanni thing?
Yeah. Yeah. The depending on what you could hear from the same sound clip, people could hear different words.
Yeah. I'm just like, okay, everyone hears everything differently. So like, why are we arguing over like, you know, just the tiniest little things? My Doug McBride, he heard Yanni and I heard Laurel. And like, you know, I was interested. I like tested it. I was like, oh my God. So when I hear a mix, when I mix, it like blew my, I was like, how the hell am I supposed to mix anything and get everyone to like it if some people are hearing weird shit that I can't even hear? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting trend that I feel like a lot of music producers that I've spoken to like are actually maybe less likely to be audiophiles just because it's kind of audio for a specific purpose to convey, you know, to execute a song, to convey a story, to convey a purpose. Whereas a lot of like audiophile purism comes from kind of like gear for gear's sake, audio for audio's sake. And it's just like kind of a different mindset I've found.
Yeah. Yeah. I often find that it's an emotional appeal. Like, you so love an artist and you just want to be closer to them. And so you want like, oh, I just want to hear every little detail.
That's interesting.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, if we're in the studio and the artist is sitting right there, I don't need like, I do want to like capture that as high in as high fidelity as possible. But like, sometimes we creatively will shelve those frequencies to like, mixers will, shelve the mix and then open it up a little bit when the chorus hits, that kind of thing. And so it's like, we're always kind of dealing with those frequencies and thinking about them and how they relate to the mix. That, when you have a nice system, it is nice when it like hits, it allows your mix to really like be presented in the way that you saw it. But, there are so many perfectly good speakers out there. I don't like it when the bass is too loud. Like so many, like companies will like present their like, speakers as like super high def, whatever, and amazing. And the bass is just way too loud because people perceive that as like that feeling of fullness is like good sound.
100%. Yeah, no, especially just, it's so interesting from your perspective as a producer. Cause a lot of people, that I talk to, that I read, like, it's very audiophile focused. Like it's kind of just about the gear. And I like how you're talking about like the gear with a purpose or like another way to look at the gear or to be informed by the gear. So I think all that is interesting. Like a great example is, a lot of times when talking about different headphones, cause we talk about a lot of headphones on here, like a lot of them will be trying to like reproduce like this is exactly what it sounds like to be in the room with these artists, or this will be the most realistic and natural sound. And sometimes it makes me wonder, because I'm like, well, if a record is being produced, like the recording engineer is kind of producing and creating a very specific sound, a very specific feel that isn't necessarily supposed to be on the other end captured to be like what it is like to be in the room. Like you kind of are sculpting every detail of that. So I wonder if that's like not maybe a pointless goal, but if we should rethink the way that we're, listening to the music and trying to perfect our sound, if maybe that's not quite the right paradigm to move off of.
Yeah. Look, in a perfect world, if you could say like, oh, I'm going to completely capture like this jazz quartet, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's the kind of stuff that you really want to like be in the room for. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of the music we listen to today, you can't even be in the room for it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so based on the production and the way that the mix is pumping and all that stuff. And it would never feel that way performed live. Rock bands, that's better. Jazz quartets, the best. A symphony, the purest form of whatever. And you want to be in the room for that. But like, it's like, everyone has a unique perspective, no matter where you're sitting in the room. If you and I are in the same room, I could be sitting next to the drum set and it's fucking loud and I can't hear anything. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And you're sitting all the way in the back of the room and it's a nice mix. And so I'm like, it's like, from whose perspective, why? It's all about the story that you're trying to tell. It's about
totally, 100%.
It's about, you know what I mean? So how, if we could have a perfect world where like that performance is captured and then you're listening to it on your headphones on the CTA train or whenever you feel like it, we just don't live in that kind of world where there is a best, where there is an objective best, where there is like the best gear or the best whatever. There is really good gear that will suit a lot of people's needs. It's just tools to tell human stories, and so, that's my feeling is like, people, I get my eyes kind of gloss. I like good gear. And like, I think of it as like, oh, that's something that I know I'm going to keep that in my tool belt. And like, I know that this mic and this chain and this kind of whatever setup is going to work for me in these particular situations when I'm trying to tell this story. And I'll keep those in the back of my mind. But like when people keep talking about the endless list of gear and oh, this is a better this is a better that, this is a better that, I'm like, they're all probably pretty good. Mm-hmm. It's just like, yeah. So that's coming from someone who didn't like dedicate their life to like in studio hard engineering work. I'm not a Jeff Emmerich, you know what I mean? I'm not like a dude who's like innovative when it comes to real sound design and like, that kind of stuff. Because I haven't had to be so far, you know what I mean? And as I see it, I mean, as computers get faster and faster and faster, most stuff will just be done, you know, because of constrained budgets through the digital realm. You know, there will be probably a point where like the best engineers can't tell the difference between two types of like a digital pre and a analog pre. That's my theory, but maybe I'll be wrong.
Well, I think you might be right about that too, because sometimes I wonder too, like when you really get in the weeds with like gear and you know, different kinds of materials and stuff at such a granular level. Like I wonder at what point, like when you start to not be able to tell what the difference is between a certain, you know, if something, you know, lets you hear certain frequencies in a different way, but 99 out of 100 people can't actually tell. Like it makes me wonder kind of, you know, what the point of that is. So it's interesting that you bring that up.
But let me say this, as I grow as a mixing engineer and producer, there are things that just sound really good. And it's like, you can just tell, you're like, okay, this sounds really good. But oftentimes it's like, that only matters if you have a really good singer or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like,
that's a great point. Yeah.
It's like it's like the marriage of the two, the great gear with a great singer. That's when the magic happens. But like, you know, I don't know. So I just wish there was a way to like connect. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, what do you say to, you know, someone on the other end who's like, yeah, I'm an audiophile and that's why I need to listen to my, you know, Aretha Franklin record with only the best, you know, material possible, and it does make a difference, and I can hear the difference, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. More power to you, you know. Like that's yeah. If someone's dead, that's definitely like, you know, that's a great reason to preserve the high fidelity, whatever, and like keep her spirit alive in those records. Yeah, I mean, if they can do it, great. It's just, you know, she still sounds good, like on my home system. So,
true. She will transcend the gear. That is probably true.